All right, welcome to another edition of Rock Show Critique. In today's episode, we are going to rank the songs of Diamond David Lee Roth. Welcome. And
Hey Joe, how you doing? Thanks for having me back on the show. Really looking forward to this.
yeah, this is going to be a good one. Obviously, this is Christopher Hilton and his famous book there, The Rise, Fall, and Rebirth of Hair Metal. And, we've done a couple episodes together, and this is it's been a while, but this is going to be a good one here. So let's go ahead and start digging in here.
Yeah, I always welcome any opportunity to talk about the Diamond One, right? Certainly one of the forefathers of all things 80s hard rock, one of the greatest characters, performers, personalities, frontmen, you name it. In short, all hail Dave, right? At least 70s, 80s, and 90s Dave, perhaps. And like you were saying, YouTube is filled with shows about rankings and album rankings, but I haven't seen too many focused on David Lee Roth's solo career, if any. So happy to be doing something a little different. Might seem like a strange choice. I will admit to your audience that when we first start talking about doing the next show, I initially brought up the idea of doing the top 10 Van Halen songs, right? And I figured I would just go ahead and jot down like 15 or 20 or so of my favorite Van Halen songs. And then, it would be hard like cutting it down to 10, but I figured that's just part of the exercise. So I took out a pen and paper and I started making a list and I got done and I said, I got like 47 songs. I said, there's no way I'm getting this down to 10. Maybe if you did like Sammy only or Dave only, I don't know. So I said, well, I can't do Van Halen. Maybe we'll just do David Lee Roth solo. And that seemed much more manageable, at least I thought. But it was a little harder than I thought. The top four or five I didn't have so much trouble with. There was probably like at least a dozen or so songs that had any claim, all would have had any claim to the bottom five. So I struggled a little bit with that. So hopefully our list will give a little bit of variety. I'm not sure we'll have how many we'll have that match. How many do you think?
I don't know. When it comes to songs, it's a whole different ball game because it depends on how much a song could touch you, or how much you like it. There's a lot involved here. We can both like the same exact 10 songs possibly, but to have them all in the same order, it's going to be that would be very hard, I would say, considering the wide variety of styles and songs that he has in his catalog here.
Oh yeah. And hey, before we get started, I always do this whenever I do any of these shows, but I did my best to pick my favorites, which admittedly can vary on any given day. But when we do these top 10 lists, like best sub, I'll be the first to admit this is a completely subjective thing, right? So people are going to be naturally, hey, Chris, you idiot, where was this song or why was this song? I mean, this is a fully subjective experience, so be gentle, folks. I think David Lee Roth himself said it best. What did he say? He said musical taste is like what did he say? I'm sorry, I'm blowing the quote. He said music is like girlfriends. There's no accounting for personal taste. So I figured, all right, that seems to do well for these things. So we'll see how we do.
Yeah, he's had so many quotes over the years. I didn't know exactly which one you were referring to. Good old
Yeah.
Diamond Dave the Entertainer there.
Oh yes. Should be fun though. Ready to get started.
All right, so obviously we're just going to run down real quick, give you a quick listing of the albums that he recorded under for his solo career. Six full length albums, and obviously it all started really with the EP that came out way back when, 1985. He had a four-song EP that came out that featured some big songs from it. I'm sure a couple of them may show up on the lists here. And then from there, obviously that was when he came out with Eat 'em and Smile in 1986. That was his first full length solo album, went platinum, reached as high as number four. That's none other than Eat 'em and Smile with its unique cover there. And he followed that up 2 years later with Skyscraper, which finally saw the light of day in 1988, another platinum release there. And then it seems like that's pretty much kind of where things kind of started to go south for him. He did come up with 1991, which was 3 years later. He came out with A Little Ain't Enough, which went gold. Another 3 years later, we got Your Filthy Little Mouth, which 1994 only reached number 78. You got to remember, though, that was at the time when things were really going full force with grunge. He did finally make another album in 1998, called it the DLR Band. That was a solid release. I thought that was a big comeback from the last couple albums. And then his last one to date is Diamond Dave, which came out in July of 2003. So there's a quick rundown on the kind of small discography, considering he went solo way back in 1985. Very interesting catalog he's got here. So without any further ado, I'll let you start off with your number 10 diamond cut here.
Okay, I get to start. I appreciate that. So I'm gonna go crazy right out of the gate, as I've been known to do. Hopefully, I won't lose your audience right off the bat because my number 10 song just may be a David Lee Roth song that some people haven't even heard of. It's called "Somewhere Over the Rainbow Bar and Grill." I suspect you at least have heard of this, Joe. This was never actually formally released on any of the albums you named there. And one of the reasons I wanted to pick this, even though it's a little out at left field, is because I didn't want this list to just be like your 8 favorite songs off Eat 'Em Smile, and then just like Paradise and California Girls, right? Because this could be that, and that'd be boring, and no one would want to listen. So I did want to add a little bit of variety to it. But for those that aren't familiar, Dave did a set of primarily acoustic recordings with guitarist John Five, who played on that DLR band album you referenced. They did that back in, I think, around 2010, 2011. They had some sessions that they did together, maybe a dozen songs, but none of them were ever formally released on an album. I think he's released 6 or 7 of them as one of standalone singles. But in 2020, he released this one, Somewhere Over the Rainbow Bar and Grill, and I just thought it was fantastic. I love the song. It's not like a full-blown electric rocker. It's more like an acoustic singer-songwriter thing, but it's just an amazing tune, and I'm a big fan of the nostalgia in it. If you listen to the lyrics, I'm a big fan of nostalgia in general. Of course, probably most of the listeners here. I mean, we're all talking about David Lee Roth here, and primarily the '80s. But it's a great song. It kind of reminds you, how good Dave can be with just a tune to get some character into it and some personality. So if anyone hasn't heard it, please go check it out. And the other thing I thought when I heard this song, and this sounds like a shameless plug, and I apologize, it is not. But you see my book in the background, and it's got the very utilitarian title, "The Rise, Fall, and Rebirth of Hair Metal." But when I saw Dave's song, "Somewhere Over the Rainbow Bar and Grill," I said, "Oh man, that would have been the better title for the book." I said that would have been excellent, but leave it to Dave to think of that and not me. But that's my number 10. I assume you have heard the song, right?
Yeah, yep,
What do you think?
definitely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, out of his later material, that is one of the standout tracks for sure.
Okay.
Because like you said, a lot of people probably would have like the whole Eat 'Em and Smile album probably in this list. I'm a little Eat 'Em and Smile heavy, but I'm not all the way. So
Understandable. Do you ever think we're going to get to hear that album of songs he did with John Five?
I'm sure eventually everything will find its way out, knowing him, because he's kind of like a rock history kind of guy, and I'm sure we'll see stuff out there at some point, more of it for sure, especially the more John Five now is starting to get more acclaim now. Obviously, he's going to be touring with Motley Crue there, so that should be very interesting.
Oh, yes, for sure.
All right, so that brings me to my number 10, which oddly enough, it's a name of one of his albums. It's none other than Skyscraper.
Okay.
Yeah, this song was definitely one of the highlights for me out of his solo catalog. It's different, and that's the one thing I really liked about it, how different it was compared to like a lot of the whole album actually. It definitely stands out, and I really like the whole concept of everything to do with the album. Um, the whole skyscraper, the way he's climbing the mountain there and everything. Was kind of surprised. It seems like it's weird how certain singles get picked, but sometimes that all has to do with the record companies, as we know. Um, but I found that that song was definitely one of the highlights of his career.
Yeah, I like that song a lot. It didn't make my top 10 list, but I really like it kind of has this atmospheric mood. And you're right, it's a little bit different of a tempo, a little bit different of a melody. Steve Vai was doing some fairly, innovative things, or at least experimental things at the time, at least for a David Lee Roth record. The whole album has kind of a unique sound to it. And yeah, the pictures of him climbing Half Dome Mountain Yosemite, certainly neat in the videos. It's interesting. You read articles about that, and you saw all these fancy pictures, and then you read, Dave was actually scared to death hanging off the side of those mountains. But yeah, I like that song too. But you're right, the singles are kind of interesting. I think outside of obviously Just Like Paradise, I think didn't they pick Stand Up or something as the next single off that record? And I thought that was a bizarre choice. Skyscraper I thought would have been a more interesting pick, but you're right. You just never know what's going to get picked as a single.
Yeah, yeah, Stand Up. Actually reached number 64 on the charts for a song that probably a lot of people have totally either never heard of or forgot about at this point, unfortunately. Um, but that's the way it was back in those days.
Yep.
So that will take us to your number 9 choice.
Okay, I'm heading to a different album. I'm heading to 1991's A Little Ain't Enough. And you mentioned this was kind of the time the musical tide was turning. But I really like this album. I think it's an underrated album as far as what was out there. Is a little different for Dave in that he had Bob Rock producing, so it has a pretty polished, pretty slick sound throughout the album, pretty commercial type of vibe. Which is also interesting because after Skyscraper, which I personally thought and a lot of people thought was way overproduced, in terms of the technology that was introduced there, which was pretty cutting edge for 1988, to record A Little Ain't Enough. I'm sure Dave took his band up to Vancouver, of course, to be with Bob Rock, but he booked his band in like the slimiest, lousiest hotel in the city, because he wanted to inspire this, back to their roots, back to down and dirty rock and roll writing. How successful was he at that? I think it was certainly more, less experimental than Skyscraper, but anything with Bob Rock's production on it, aside from a Metallic album, perhaps later in their career, is going to be, very polished. So it was kind of a mixed bag. But anyway, album aside, I picked, what most people would probably consider a deep track. But for me, I always liked a song called Last Call. And this is on the back half of the album. But this is like a big bluesy swing romp. And of course, it's got these typically great cheeky lyrics from Dave. It's got a big chorus. So, apologies if people didn't write me off for my first pick. They may write me off for this one because it's not the first song people would think of. But, Jason Becker, a great guitarist, is doing all his crazy best Eddie Van Halen impersonations on this in the solo. And it seems like when I put my Dave playlist together, the song always makes it. So it snuck into the top 10.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, that's definitely it's a song that you caught me off guard with on that one, but
I do
yeah,
that.
it's definitely one of the solid choices off that album for sure. There's a lot of that album to me is, I think it's in the middle of the pack for Dave's albums if we actually were ranking the albums, but there are some fine moments on it, definitely by far.
Yeah, and I mean, this album was released at the same time Van Halen was putting out From Lawful Carnal Knowledge, right? And I thought, aside from a few songs on For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge that are, really just absolute standouts, I thought the majority of both albums aren't all that different from another. Although, A Little Ain't Enough certainly didn't have the sales that Dave wanted at the time. That record was fairly easy to find in the bargain bins for those who remember. Of course, not as much as a little Your Filthy Little Mouth, right? The next album. I remember it was like 1994, 1995. You could go into any record store, and yep, they still had those back then. And the bargain bills were filled with like 30 copies of Your Filthy Little Mouth and Motley Crue's self-titled album, right? They were just
Yeah,
all filled with those. So, I mean, for what it's worth, I happen to like them, but again, that whole taste thing.
yeah, I hear you on that. All right, so number 9 for me, I'm going to go dig back into the Skyscraper album, and I'm pulling out Hina.
Okay.
Yep, that's definitely always been one of my favorites from the album. Uh, you know, I listening to that album, obviously, just like Paradise was always one of the, really big songs. That is the big song from the album, and then you got a couple others. But um, I think once again, in this situation, they just didn't pick the right singles for the album. And but that's the one good thing about album rock too, is that just you get to get those deep cuts, those album tracks that never really got the seen the light of day. But this is definitely one of these songs I definitely recommend to people. If you've never heard it, definitely give it a listen because I think you're gonna really enjoy it. It's definitely one of the highlights of the whole Skyscraper album.
Yeah, it's another pretty eclectic choice in terms of, it's not exactly what people might expect from David Lee Roth. Again, Steve Vai was doing some experimental things. Skyscraper as an album is difficult for me because I like the album, I like it a lot. But I had, a couple challenges with it when I first heard it, maybe even still. The first was that the production on it I think is very thin, and it's very technology based. It's not, five guys in a room with, guitars playing at the same time. Not that, it needs to be that, but I did question some of the technology and the experimentation and kind of the thin sound of the album. But I thought there were some great songs on it. Songs like Knuckle Bones or Hot Dog and a Shake, and certainly some of the hits. I mean, if you put the production of A Little Ain't Enough, that big bombastic sound with all the reverb and things like that on Skyscraper, I thought maybe it might have come across a little better. But the album did really well, especially on the strength of Just Like Paradise. And it did have some interesting experimental stuff, like Hina, to your point. But yeah, challenge people to go listen to that. They might not know what they're getting into.
So do you think the album kind of the production of it had because of the fact that David and Steve Vai were the ones that produced it, and I would assume that was probably one of his earliest albums that he would be, doing in the full production all himself.
Yep. Yeah, it was definitely those two at the control board, right? And they were trying to embrace, a couple of things, which was in 1988. First of all, you had digital recording for the first time for a lot of folks. I think Open Up and Say Ah, at least in this genre by Poison, was the first album that was fully digitally produced. And they took the same approach with Skyscraper. And it had a lot of keyboard type of sounds, which was interesting because Dave didn't like that direction when Eddie took it, but certainly worked for him on Just Like Paradise, right? Scored him a
Yeah.
big hit. Billy Sheehan wasn't really a fan of what Dave and Steve Vai were doing at the time, right? He wanted that more bare bones rock and roll. He didn't want to sit at the console and twiddle with the knobs all night to get different sounds. And like I said, Steve Vai was moving into different things that were not your standard 80s rock and roll, type of blueprints. So it was a different type of record for him. I like the record. Sometimes I wish it had a little more of a big sound to it, but that's just me. It's kind of a pet peeve. I don't know. I need to get off that.
All right. Well, that should take us to your number 8 then. Let's see what you
Okay.
got for that.
Okay, so you're hitting Skyscraper heavy so far, which is good. I'm gonna hit A Little Ain't Enough heavy, which is a little strange. So I got another track from A Little Ain't Enough, and then I promise I'll get off the album at least for a little bit, maybe. I chose It's Showtime. I love this song, right? This is just an absolute barn burner of a track. It's kind of classic Dave in terms of the spirit and the lyrics. Again, talking about performance. I never understood. We talk about strange choices for singles. Sometimes you get strange choices for sequencing. At least in my view, I never understood why this song was buried. I think it was like the eighth track on the album. So if you were lucky enough to get to it, I thought it was one of the better tunes. It was only one of two songs I think that was co-written by his guitarist Jason Becker. That one and "Drop in the Bucket," which I think was the last two songs on the record. So I don't know why they were sequenced down there. But I mean, Becker just goes absolutely crazy on this track, and it's classic Dave. So I suspected this might show up on your list, but we'll see. Maybe you'll surprise me.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the true highlights of A Little Ain't Enough for sure. I really enjoy that song for sure. All right, let's see what I've got at trusty old number 8 here. Yeah, I'm kind of pulling one out of the hat here. It seems like going into Eat 'em and Smile and pulling out the old Sinatra standard. That's life.
Oh,
I thought Diamond Dave did a pretty good job on this song. It wasn't really anything, you didn't really hear it anywhere unless you actually had the album, obviously.
Right.
It wasn't one of, it was a cover, and it did obviously it got released oddly enough, they released that as the third single, but it really didn't do much. It reached as high as number 85 there. But yeah, I thought, here you are covering a Sinatra song, and kind of an odd choice considering how the rest of that album is. Eat 'em and Smile is really more, heavier and a lot. Steve Vai really, goes to town on a lot of the album, but and then you pull out this song and it's like, but a little change of pace, and that's sometimes that's what's needed on an album, and and they stuck it right at the end. Because obviously I don't think you could have put it anywhere else on the album because it would have ruined the whole flow of the album. So that yeah, so that's what I got for my number 8.
Okay. I mean, first of all, only Dave could get away with having that on an album, right? And doing that song justice, and he does. And people might think, they're scratching their heads, why would you do a song like that? But you listen to him do it and you say, that's perfect, right? Great take. And yeah, the Eat 'Em and Smile record, this is kind of a fairly diverse record when you break it down. There's some big band type of stuff on it like that, which kind of harkens back to the EP before that. There's the cover of Tobacco Road. There's some straight ahead hard rock. There's some slower stuff, and then there's of course my number 7 choice, which is almost speed metal, and I suspect this might show up on your list later too. Shy Boy. So it's hard to make a Dave list without putting this on there. I mean, I talked about It's Showtime being a burner. This somehow even stomps that. It's almost not even so much of a song as it is really just an excuse for Billy Sheehan and Steve Vai to just go ballistic, right? And they do. Steve goes as fast and as furious as he can, and Billy's happy to say, "I can keep up with that." And amazingly enough, he does. I mean, just an incredible performance both from those guys. Deeper fans of Dave would know that that song was brought into the band from Billy. He actually did it back when he was in Talus. I think it was on, what was it, 1982? Don't quote me on that. I think it was the Sink Your Teeth Into album. They had actually recorded a version that was pretty similar, but of course, Dave, once he gets his hands on that mic, makes it his own. But it's hard to make a Dave playlist without Shy Boy going crazy for 2.5 minutes, I think.
Yeah, that's a solid choice. That was one of my honorable mentions. Oddly enough, figuring me from Buffalo and Talus from Buffalo and Billy from Buffalo, how can you not have that on your list? But unfortunately, it definitely remains an honorable mention. But the cool thing, actually, if you got to see this tour back in the day, for those that might have, he actually opened with Shy Boy on his Eat 'Em and Smile tour. So that was pretty cool. Pretty cool there. To take that particular song and open up your whole show with, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
at that time, that was his first real solo tour. And man, they went all out on that tour. That was definitely I would say after all the David Lee Roth tours that I've seen, that still ranks as my number one. The stage was just enormous, the lighting was amazing, and it was just a phenomenal set. And it seemed like his other live the next year, or the next album that they toured for, obviously was the second album there, which for some reason that tour really did not it seemed like it didn't really, there was a lot of stuff going on the Skyscraper tour, I believe. By that point Sheehan had already left, and they had other people in the band at that point. It was just Steve Vai and David Lee Roth from, I think Greg was still there, yeah.
Yeah.
But the holdover, other than that, it was just weird not seeing Billy Sheehan up there. And the way they only played like a real small amount of songs from Eat 'Em and Smile, ironically. And
Yeah, they
then,
played a lot for the Skyscraper album, as I remember, like almost 5 or 6 tracks.
oh yeah, it was very deep on that. And that bad thing was, considering he didn't even come to Buffalo, I think that he did that on purpose because of the bad blood between him and Billy, and he probably thought maybe he irked some fans by Billy leaving, which probably was definitely the case. So they ended up playing Niagara Falls, which is, about 20 minutes from Buffalo, but he played there, smaller venue. But they rushed through the Eat 'em and Smile songs, like played them at ultra fast pace. Like they didn't even really feel, why bother playing them if you weren't gonna, you know what I mean? It didn't make no sense how fast they played through it, going crazy, sounding like the Chipmunks. It was so fast, it was ridiculous. But
I do remember that. It's interesting you should bring that up because I had taken note of that myself, and I was always curious about the selection on the timing. Some of them were almost double time, which I didn't understand the choice.
yeah, that left a bad taste in my mouth. As long as also I wasn't a fan of Faster Pussycat. They opened the show for Roth, and they
I
were
did see
new
that show as well. Yeah.
at the time. I couldn't stand them. I had to go, who are these guys?
Come on, Joe.
Now I love Faster Pussycat now, but back then, no, I was not a fan. But over time, they won me over. So,
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that. Maybe someday we'll go absolutely crazy. We'll do a Faster Pussycat ranking. I don't know what that would look like. Uh,
all right. So that brings us to,
number six for me. We're
yeah,
halfway through this thing almost. We haven't picked a single Sam song. I don't know if that's what that says about us, or if it says, like you said at the beginning. I mean, Dave's got a pretty diverse catalog, and a lot of things could qualify. I think that's great, actually. But again, as I started making this, I looked back and I said, did I represent every album? Not that that's a goal, right? I mean, you pick your favorite songs, and if some albums get left off, they do.
yeah.
I did leave off a couple albums. I'm hoping you hit them so that we can at least talk about them, because I didn't feel good about leaving off a couple albums. I think I like them, but I just couldn't justify the songs getting into the top 10 for whatever reason. So I got stuck back on A Little Ain't Enough for my number six. And you're right. I mean, this is not my favorite David Lee Roth album. I think it's good, but it's not like if someone was listening to David Lee Roth for the first time, I wouldn't say, hey, that's your first album. But I kept picking songs from it. And at number six, I have Babies on Fire. I thought this was probably one of my absolute favorites off the album. Dave is in top form vocally on this song, and he really was throughout the full album. It would make no mistake. I mean, well, like all of us, Dave's voice is kind of straight off the path a little bit in the recent years as he gets older, and I get older. I can't do the things I used to either. God knows, but he was still in fine shape on A Little Ain't Enough, and probably even Your Filthy Little Mouth as well. But I think this song, if any on that record, really harkened back to old Van Halen. People like to say old Van Halen. I think this was it. And again, Bob Rock puts this super polished sheen on it. It's got extra things. It's got female backing vocals. It's got some extra instrumentation in it. I think there's even a passing harmonica or two, if I can recall right. And
Yeah.
he had that on some other songs in the album. The second track, "Shoot It," has a lot of that. I like that song too. It didn't make my list. Maybe it would have been an honorable mention. But if you were picking up A Little Ain't Enough and you were hoping to hear a little, Women and Children First or Van Halen 2, you could do a lot worse than Babies on Fire. And again, it always seems to make my playlist for Dave. So here it sits at number six. I doubt it's on your list.
No, it's definitely not on my list,
Okay.
unfortunately. What'd you have for number
Are we
seven?
going to match any songs? Any songs?
What'd you have for your number seven?
Seven was Shy Boy.
Okay, so we skipped my number seven, so I'll just do it right in a row here.
Okay, sorry
Not
about
a
that.
big deal.
I got excited.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure because I'm going, which song is next? Because I know I didn't talk about my number seven yet. So for me, number seven was another cover. Came off the EP, Just a Gigolo. Um, I really, that was one of the songs you used to hear on the radio a lot. That and California Girls were the two big ones on the radio from Roth when he first came out with the EP. And yeah, it reminds you pretty much of That's Life. Same type of song, the same way Roth goes about performing it. Does a great top-notch job covering it. And what more can be said? It's a cover, but I thought he did a phenomenal job on it.
Well, I'm so glad actually that you have it on your list, because anyone interested in David Lee Roth solo stuff, has got to at least zero in on that and the other cover from the EP, which I suspect we might get to a little later on. I didn't have it on my list just because I couldn't seem to bring myself to, if I only had 10 songs, to pick a cover. But then Shy Boy is technically a cover, so I break my own rules. I don't know what I'm doing. But I'm glad you brought it up, right? Because it's classic Dave. I mean, only he could take that medley Just a Gigolo and I Ain't Got Nobody, and turn it into this classic song. And I don't think I've ever been to a party back when I used to go to parties like 20 years ago, where that song didn't come on the radio. Everybody smiled, everybody had a good time, and everybody sang along. It's classic DLR. So I'm glad at least you got it on one of these lists.
Okay, so now I'll just go right into my number six. And that I'm digging back into Skyscraper again for the monumental song on there, which was Just Like Paradise, obviously. Um, you know, that was the song that was the first one released. It broke the album, and obviously that song did really, really well for Roth. It's probably his most, I would say to this day, it's probably the one you hear more than any of the others. Like if you happen to go somewhere and just hear like music playing, that seems to be the one that I always seem to hear wherever I am, oddly enough. But just like
Yeah.
Paradise, top 10 is only his second, it's only his second song to crack the top 10, oddly enough, which is, looking back, that's kind of a surprise, but it did reach number six back in 87. That was and he's only got one other top 10, which I'm sure you'll get to we'll get to very soon here.
One of us will.
Yep. So
Yeah, it
yeah,
was a top 10 signal, and it was huge, right? It was actually number one on the rock charts, as opposed to the mainstream chart. Um, it was an interesting song, though, right? Because again, David didn't like the direction that Eddie was going in Van Halen with the keyboards, and here we have a big keyboard pop rock song, right? Straight at it, and of course, it does tremendous. And for people who are looking for something that's pop metal, pop rock, I mean, it's hard to find a better song with a better melody and a more catchy chorus. I thought it was interesting. I've seen several interviews or read some interviews with Steve Vai since then. And I'm sure I mean, he hated that song. He absolutely hated it. He thought it was just pop rubbish, and was too simple. And he said, yeah, he hated playing it, because, it wasn't up to his standards of complexity and things like that. I mean, again, you don't need an overly complex song to have a hit, but that was interesting. And that's, started some of what started to rub Billy the wrong way. He said, hey, this is no longer a rock and roll type of outfit when we're doing keyboard driven pop rock songs. But I mean, you can't get away from the success. And you're right. But I mean, it's a fantastic song, no matter how you slice it. I thought one of the more interesting things I had heard about that track was that, of course, for those who are old like we are, they remember the TV show Beverly Hills 90210. And I suspect you already know that the management for that show, when it kicked off, they called Dave's representation and they said, hey, we want to use Just Like Paradise as the theme song for this TV show, which of course, would have been beyond huge. And management said, no, we're not interested in stuff like that. And they didn't even bring it to Dave. So potentially Just Like Paradise could have been the theme song for Beverly Hills 90210, which might have launched Dave in a completely different direction, but alas, it was never meant to be.
yeah. At the time, that show was huge when it first came out. That would have probably changed the whole projection of his whole solo career, possibly. He
Yeah,
just, yeah.
interesting tidbit. So I think that's the first one that you've mentioned that is going to show up on my list later. And so at least we knew that was going to be there. So maybe we're not completely insane. We'll see how we go the rest of the way.
All right, we're cracking into the top five now. Now we're getting down to the nitty gritty.
All right. So at least, is it me?
Yep.
Okay. At least I'm not going to pick out a song from A Little Ain't Enough again. I'm off that album for now. And I'm on Eat 'Em and Smile, which, is just, I mean, what a great record, right? I mean, after he did the EP, which I thought was a really creative, interesting thing and a lot of fun, I don't think anybody expected Eat 'Em and Smile from David Lee Roth coming, he struck first coming away from Van Halen. What just a monster record, and the first two, even three tracks are just like barnstormers. And then he takes a break from my number five track, which is Ladies Night in Buffalo, which people are not going to have this, I don't think, on their David Lee Roth top 10 list. And I just kept coming back to it. Because first of all, you need a breather after the first couple of songs on that record. But, creatively speaking, I think this was a really interesting track by him. It has this kind of low burn, just a slow simmer throughout the song. And it gives Billy and Steve a chance to kind of take a breath and have some space between the notes. And to this day, I mean, I'll be the first to admit, I have no idea what this song's about. I don't know what a ladies' night in Buffalo is. I haven't been able to find it in any literature. If someone knows, please let me know. So I don't know what that's all about. But Roth sings about, damaged, jaded lovers and kind of a restrained, almost hushed voice, which is very different from the first few songs on the album. But I always think this song is super cool, super groovy. And here it is sitting at number 5. But again, I bet it's not on your list, is it?
Well, we shall see, because
Okay.
my number 5 is actually something a little different here. So I'll leave you suspenseful here if you even remember when we come back to the down the list here. So yeah, for me, I'm gonna go with for my number 5 is the cover that he actually played in 2020 when he opened for Kiss. Oddly enough, I was shocked. Tobacco Road, just a phenomenal song. David, this is my uh, favorite David Lee Roth cover song by a mile. There's no other one higher on my list. I'll throw that right at you right now, unfortunately. But yeah, what can you say? Tobacco Road. I always loved how he did it on the Eat 'em and Smile tour. I always thought that that was awesome. The way that he opened up with Shy Boy and then went right into Tobacco Road without even stopping to take a breath. It was just that was a great tour, let me tell you. I don't know if you ever got to see that one.
I did not. My first David Lee Roth tour solo was on the Skyscraper tour.
Okay. Yeah, so we got Cinderella as the opener. Man, oh man, what a great, fantastic double bill. That would have been the first time I got to see Cinderella. So they just that was like their first major tour. They opened for David Lee Roth, and then Roth played Buffalo in like the fall of '86, and then he came back to Rochester in January on the next leg of the tour of '87, and he brings another band with him this time, none other than Tesla,
Yes.
before they got big. So I mean, that was like their first ever tour. It was interesting. I just heard Frankie Hannon mention the other day that they released the album and everything. Did you know that they never did anything pretty much after the album was made? Frank was still working as like a garbage man or something even after the album was released, and then finally they landed the David Lee Roth tour, and then he never looked back from that point on.
Yeah, I think Jeff Keith was still driving big semi trucks even after they released the album. They kept their day jobs.
Yeah, that's amazing. I never knew that. Never knew
Yeah.
that story at all. I thought that was very interesting. So at least that worked out well for them, that's for sure.
Oh yeah.
All right, so yeah, so that's what I got there, and that brings us down to none other than number 4. What do you got?
All right. So the home stretch. So you'd be proud of me here. Now I'm going to hit the Skyscraper album, and this is a weird choice for me because when I first got the album, I really distinctly recall I used to skip this song all the time. Uh, I picked "Damn Good." Which of course is one of the, or maybe the only slow kind of balladish song on the album. And I guess I was 13, 14 years old when the album came out, right? So I wanted big party tunes. And the album is full of that. But when it got to Damn Good, I said, oh, this isn't a party song. This is bringing me down. I'm skipping that. But only later in life, did I really come to appreciate that song. Now, again, it's kind of like Somewhere Over the Rainbow Bar and Grill, and that this has a big nostalgic element to it. And I guess the older we get, the more we want the nostalgia. But I thought this is just a wonderful song in terms of sentiment and melody. And again, only Dave can put that amount of character in the lyrics. And to this day, I wonder exactly what it's about lyrically. I mean, normally I know this kind of stuff, but I don't exactly. I wonder if it's about his days in old Van Halen. I suspect maybe that's true. But this is kind of a surprisingly unadored ballad on the album, and Steve Vai does some vaguely, I guess, Eastern sounding guitar kind of chimes, and Roth just kind of croons about the good times in his past and kind of longing for that. And I don't know, maybe he's wishing his prior bandmates good times from them both in their next steps. Um, but I love this song. I think it's fantastic. It absolutely. I struggle with some of these choices, but I had no problem getting this song in the top 5.
Yeah, fantastic choice, which I'll be getting to in a little bit, as a matter of fact.
Excellent. Okay, so we're coming together.
Yeah. Better late than never, right?
Right.
But it's good giving different perspectives on the catalog. That's the one reason why we bring a guest in. I could easily just rattle off mine and leave it at that, but I like to, you mentioned a bunch of songs that I didn't even going, man, I wouldn't have thought of to put them in my top 10 because they're not there right now. But hey, it makes me want to dig back into the catalog and play those songs to give them a good listen again and, see what I get out of them. Because, there's many songs, I'll be the first to admit that like you said, how you used to skip this one. You appreciate it songs later on down the road. And maybe you didn't get it the first time or whatever the case may be. And then you get to appreciate it. And that's the best thing about music, how you can always go back and listen again. It's always a piece of history. It's always going to be right there. You got it on the CD or whatever media you listen to, and just great to have for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Other people's viewpoints are normally the most fun part of this type of stuff for me. Even in the book, I try and it's a historical book, right? So it's factual, but you can't get away from giving your opinions on some things. And I love it when people reach out and they say, "Hey, you're crazy because the album you don't like, the album you like the least by these folks is my favorite record." Oftentimes I'll go back to them and I miss something, or I hear something that I didn't hear before, and it's just a great experience to be able to interact with folks and see different tastes.
Definitely. All right. So that was your number four,
Yep.
and I'm coming back to one that you selected already. We're going to Ladies' Night in Buffalo.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so happy.
Oh yeah, definitely. Great song. And when I first heard it, yeah, even not being even from Buffalo, I could care less if he said "Ladies' Night in Chicago," whatever. Yeah, just a great song. Definitely the one of the true highlights on this album, which obviously so far I've picked a few songs from it, and I'm sure there's going to be a few more coming at us on this one here. But "Ladies' Night in Buffalo" definitely a standout on the album. Uh, Great song, and like you said, it's a change of pace. It slower, puts you in a different frame of mind from the first couple songs on the album, and how all of a sudden then it goes down to this is almost like a late night wind down type of song in a way.
Exactly.
So it's pretty cool. Definitely one of the highlights, and oddly enough, I know the phrase he got from Billy, obviously, but it was him and Vi that actually wrote the song, so that was pretty cool.
Okay, good. Hey, I'm glad someone else has an appreciation for that, like I do, because it's not your traditional, romp by David. And hey, but we're getting towards the end of this. I mean, if we don't hit a couple albums, we'll have to at least discuss those albums when we get to the end, or else we won't do the audience any service. But I noticed a couple albums are conspicuously absent so far. Maybe you'll hit them. I don't think I'm going to. So
Well,
number
we
three,
we
is that
we
it?
yeah, number three.
Okay, so now I'm sticking with the more popular stuff. I picked A Little Ain't Enough. I picked the title track off Little Ain't Enough, and then I promise that's my last song from that album. I
I
don't know.
knew I knew that was going to be on there though,
You knew it, right?
the direction you were heading. Yeah.
And like I said, I look back. I said I think I have more songs from A Little Ain't Enough than Eat 'Em and Smile, and how can that be? Because I don't like that album more than the other one. So I don't know. Someone else will have to do the math on that. And A Little Ain't Enough as a song. On one hand, I mean, it's a pretty formulaic song, right? If you look at his big hits and the big kind of '80s cliches, it's got all that. But also, I mean, this thing works. It absolutely works for what you expected. And this was Dave's comeback into a big type of thing. And people like us, we remember the video. But if you're looking for a big bombastic, pop metal song, it's all about Dave and guitar solos and wild lyrics and partying and things like that. Despite the fact that it came out in 1991, where the landscape was moving in the opposite direction than Dave. I mean, God bless him. The song wins out, right? It's hard to do wrong with this if you're just looking for a big party tune. And even though it's a little cliche and formulaic, hey, I seem to always smile when it comes on my playlist. So I couldn't leave it out of the top five.
Yeah, unfortunately, it didn't make my cut, but it would have definitely probably been number 11, just to give you a fair shake on it. Definitely,
Okay.
for me, that's the highlight of that album. There's another one I like a little bit close to it that would be an honorable mention from that particular album. Sensible Shoes. I really like that one.
Okay, a lot of people like that. That was a single too, and a little different, kind of a soft, bluesy number. Very interesting from Dave.
As I figured you didn't have any more Little Ain't Enough like you mentioned, so I've just wanted to mention Sensible Shoes because that is a good, very good song. I really like that one.
Oh yeah,
All right, so that's going to take me to my number three, which is none other than Yankee Rose. Give me those bright lights. So Yankee Rose, obviously, probably I would say it's probably the best known song from the solo career, just because it comes from his biggest solo album, and it's the song that really helped put him on the map rock wise. Like you said, he did the covers, the EP, but a lot of people weren't quite sure what to expect next, and he comes up with Yankee Rose, the lead off single, the lead off everything. This song just, you know, it's all about Dave. You know.
Yeah, I mean, this was a huge song, and I'll just let the cat out of the bag. It's going to be my number one song from Dave, which I don't think you can go too wrong having this one, two, or three. But you're right. I mean, after the EP, for Dave to strike with something like this, it was just tremendous. I thought, and people remember the video too. It was. The bulk of the video was the stage performance, which kind of references the tour that you saw. I mean, that was a heck of a show. If you remember the video, you remember he came out in all the war paint and the feathers in the
Mm-hmm.
convenience store. And what did he say? He said, give me a bottle of anything and a glazed donut to go. I never forget that, as a young teenager, watching that on MTV. But just the introduction of that band and what Steve Vai did during that song, I just think was amazing. And again, another tidbit that I'm always going to try and throw some tidbits out there, although most people know them anyway. Listen to this, but people assume when Dave is talking about the Yankee Rose, he's talking about some gorgeous young lady, perhaps. But you probably know Yankee Rose references none other than the Statue of Liberty, which was being renovated at the time and was getting a lot of press. So if you're out there and you didn't know that, listen to the lyrics again, and you'll say, "Oh, it is about the Statue of Liberty." But of course, there's plenty of like double entendres in there too, so you can
Mm-hmm.
you can hit on those. But I always thought that was interesting. But of all the 80s rock songs, some you hear today, 35, 40 years later, and maybe some don't stand up as well as others. But I mean, I still, when I hear Yankee Rose today, it sounds just as perfect of a big rock and roll song as anything does. For me, it stands up really well. It's one of those songs, they ask you, hey, what song, when it comes on the radio, do you crank the volume knob just a little bit? And for me, it's Yankee Rose. I can't help it. Just crank it up.
Yeah, 1986 must have been quite a year for guitar players because you got Vi talking with his guitar, and then of course CC DeVille comes out later on in the year and talks dirty to me, and it's just, that was a very high point, high year for guitar, in rock music,
Yeah. And of
definitely.
course, Dave comes out with the lyric, right? Guess who's back in circulation, right?
Yep.
And there he was.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. True standout for the Roth catalog for sure. Top three for me. Like you mentioned, number one for you. So let's take you down to your number two now. Let's see what can that be from? Is it from the EP, Eat 'em and Smile? What do you got there?
Well, you're probably thinking it's either California Girls or it's Just Like Paradise, because I didn't hit that one yet. So it is Just Like Paradise. Hopefully you're going to talk about California Girls, because I didn't. Because shame on me. I don't know how. I don't know what's wrong with me. Maybe it was a cover. So I slotted Just Like Paradise in there, right in between A Little Ain't Enough and Yankee Rose. But we already talked about that. So let's hear what you got as we approach the top of the mountain here.
Mine number two is from Skyscraper.
Of course.
And just like you mentioned, it's none other than Damn Good.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, this is a song for me that was always true highlight of the album. Always enjoyed every time I got to hear this one. You know, um, what more can be said? It's just the weird thing was that I was kind of surprised on how, he did release it as a single, but it never made the top 100. It did on the rock album charts. It did reach number two. But I think they really messed up on the singles for this album, Skyscraper. Just like Paradise was obviously the perfect choice and the one that definitely should have been released as number one. But Knucklebone, Stand
Yeah.
Up, just damn good, knocks these songs out of the park by a good country mile. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, probably what it suffered from is it wasn't perfect for MTV at the time, right? It wasn't a big Dave video. It wasn't a traditional power ballad, like Every Rose or Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone or Home Sweet Home or whatever the heck MTV was playing. It's kind of a more different sounding tune. I don't know that it would have fit perfectly with MTV, but I agree. It's definitely one of his best accomplishments.
All right. Yep. So that's my number two. So that
What's your number one?
you mentioned your number one already. So we're gonna
Yeah.
go with mine. Well, if you had to guess, what album do you think it's from?
If I had to guess, I would guess it's California Girls, but is it?
Wrong.
All right, hold on, wait. Don't, is it off Skyscraper?
Nope.
It's something off Eat 'em and Smile.
Yeah. Don't you remember dancing on the pier last night? Got
You
drunk and
asked me
fell
if I was
into the
going to have
water.
honorable mentions, and I really wanted that song to be in my top 10. But
I
I
was
did. I mean,
surprised it wasn't really.
it should be,
I
right? I mean, this is like another perfect pop rock song, super melody. Go ahead, you hit the title.
Yep. No doubt, going crazy. My
Going
number one
crazy.
David Lee Roth song by a good good chunk there. I don't know, something about this song I always really liked. It just stands out for me. It was a good time in life. You go back and you look back, and that song was always there. And that's a tough one because Yankee Rose is. I got them so close to each other. They were pretty much neck and neck. The whole top four could have been, like you said, any given day it could change. But I think Going Crazy though has always been a little bit more sentimental for me. I don't know, for some reason that's the one that really always stood out for me, and that's why I was really disappointed on the Skyscraper tour. I mean, glad that they played it because they really skipped over the whole basic Eat 'em a Smile album. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Going Crazy and Yankee Rose are the only two songs they played off that album on that tour.
I think that's
What
right. Yeah.
which is a shock, considering it's only on his second solo album, and usually play about 15 songs. But obviously, he had Van Halen songs to choose from too, so I guess maybe that hurt, that took away from more Eat 'em and Smile. Plus the fact that Billy wasn't there and they had Matt Bissonette on bass instead. But yeah, just great song though, and always as of right now and pretty much the last 30 years, it's always been my number one David Lee Roth solo song.
I can't find any fault with it. I think it's a great choice. Again, when I make my playlists on my phone are normally anywhere from 10 to 15 songs, and I've never had a David Lee Roth playlist in any incarnation, any version without that song on it. I really wanted it in my top 10, and I think I almost did get it slotted in there at 8, 9, or 10, and I just didn't. And again, I think I made a mistake because again, it's another perfect pop rock song, and it's like you said, it is good times. And yes, dancing on the pier last night, wonderful lyrics by Dave. Yeah, lots of fun. I'm glad you picked that. Wonderful.
Yeah. So, do you have any other honorable mentions that you wanted to bring along here?
Um, let's see. What else did I want to make my top 10 that didn't? There was certainly Going Crazy. There was certainly, I mean, California Girls, right? Again, I couldn't bring
Yeah.
myself to pick a cover song, but it's very rare that a cover of a song is better than the original. And again, of course, it's completely subjective. But Dave has a way of doing that, right? And I think his version of California Girls, I mean, that song was, you know, kind of made for him, depending on the prism you're looking through.
Mhm.
The story goes that while he was waiting around for Van Halen to get their stuff together and make the next album that they never made, he was sitting in a bar with one of his managers, and California Girls comes on, and they said, Dave, you should do this song. He said, okay. And yeah, I mean, it's perfect for him. I mean, he makes the song his own. Just a great character behind the song. So I wanted that on my list. It didn't make it. I actually really wanted to have something from Your Filthy Little Mouth because I like that album probably more than most people. I don't love all of it, but I like a lot of it, especially the first three songs, first three or four actually. And I wanted to pick "She's My Machine" or "Big Train," where everybody's got the monkey or something. But I said at the end of the day, I just can't substitute, something that I put in the top 10 for those. But I love those songs and I like that album. I thought it was really good. And I also wanted something from the David Lee Roth Band album, because you mentioned at the start,
Hmm.
that was a wonderful comeback record, and was a lot like, maybe even the early Van Halen records. Really got back to kind of his rock and roll bread and butter. But I had some, I mean, you know me, I always got problems with some. I had some problems with that album too. One of which was that, he really wanted to get back to the way they recorded, albums in the 70s with Van Halen. And he said, okay, we're doing this thing in 2 weeks and you get one or two takes for each. And if you can't nail it one or two takes, then it wasn't meant to be. And the album actually kind of sounds like that a little. I mean, it's great. I mean, it's fantastic performances, especially from John Five.
Hmm.
But I thought if it would have had a little more time and a little more production, it would have given the songs a lot more, that big sound. Whereas again, I think they're just a little thin in places. But songs like, Slam Dunk and Black
Yeah.
Sand, I mean, I really wanted these to be in my list. I just didn't have room. And also, I thought that was the first time. I mean, folks, forgive me. This was 19. What year did that come out? 1998, I think.
98. Yep.
I think that was the first album where David's voice is an acquired taste anyway, right? I mean, he's not, I mean, he'll be the first to tell you he's not the greatest technical singer in the world, but I mean, there's so much personality and character to his voice. But some of the screams sounded a little strained. They started to sound a little strained, and some of the screams and screeches started to sound a little too screamy and a little too screechy on that album, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still a great vocal performance, but I thought, between that and kind of the thin sounding production on the record, I thought it wasn't everything it could have been, and I thought it really could have been something bigger with a little more polish and production, because I think it has some really cool songs on it. But so I wanted something from those two records. I didn't get it. What were your thoughts on those albums?
Yeah, I really DLR band definitely is from to my take from the previous album, it's a step up by a good portion there. Slam Dunk you mentioned, great song. That's definitely one of the highlights. The I don't know, I never was really much of a fan of Your Filthy Mouth there, that one there. She's My Machine was the one I obviously got airplay when it first came out, but it didn't really, even on US rock chart, it only reached as high as number 12 on the rock chart.
It was
But
1994.
yeah, it was 1994, so actually to make it on the chart at all probably was a feat if you think about it, because you got to remember you're fighting along with Weezer and Green Day and everybody else at that point on that rock
Oh
chart.
yeah, it was over for Dave. I mean, he knew it. Everybody knew it, and it was a shame, but there was no change in the writing on that wall. Not then.
Yeah. But a couple of the other songs that I wanted to mention for honorable mentions, I would say Easy Street, from the
Mhm.
EP was another big song from him that got a lot of airplay back when the EP came out. Also, Tell the Truth off of A Little Ain't Enough.
Oh
That's
yeah.
another song that I really thought was one of the highlights. That even made it on the rock album chart and was released as a single. Um, Nightlife, that was an interesting song off of Your Filthy Little Mouth. That one actually, I just kind of discovered it recently. So when I was doing this exercise, I'm trying to find some songs to see how I wanted to rank them. I played that one. I said, not bad. I never really gave it much thought before because I never really, I've got that album, but I just never really touch it. I'll be honest with you. But when you got the size of the collection that I have, it's really hard to listen to them all. That's for sure. But that one is, definitely one of the highlights for me. What'd you think of just before we let you go here about "Don't Piss Me Off" off of the Best album? Did you ever get to hear that one?
Of course, of
Yep.
course. And I thought it's a pretty cool little ditty, for lack of other words. I probably would have rather had, a different song from a different album, but I think it was cool to get a new song. I probably would have preferred something a little more traditional, in the big electric guitar, rock and roll kind of landscape. But I think it's a well-written song and I enjoy it. I won't skip it if it comes on. It probably doesn't make my playlist, but I think it caught me by surprise at the time, right? Because you're looking at a David Lee Roth best of, and this first song on it, it's kind of like this weird kind of like eclectic thing. But maybe it was perfect, right? Because you look at all these David Lee Roth albums and even some of the songs on our lists, only Dave could pull off the variety of some of this stuff, which is kind of interesting because you think about David Roth, the first thing you think of is not variety. You think, I know this guy and I know what he stands for and I know what he's all about, but there's a lot of different stuff on a lot of his different records. Particularly, another one we didn't even talk about. We didn't even talk about Diamond Dave, which is mostly cover songs anyway, and probably for the best that we didn't. But again, there's some cool stuff on there that you wouldn't necessarily think. So, for those out there that are more casual Dave listeners, maybe dig a little deeper into the well, or just make your playlist of what Joe and I picked out here. You still got probably 16, 17 songs there.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right. Well, maybe we'll have to come back and actually rank the albums with them one of these days. We'll see how it goes here. But
Maybe,
yeah, it was great exercise in talking about the songs and the wide variety that that he has. So much variety of type of songs. And that's the one unique aspect I really liked about this catalog as a whole. It's not just all one type of music. He goes across his genres here and there, and he even has some country mixed in there with a couple of performers on. Was it Your Filthy Little Mouth?
yeah.
He
Mhm.
did some stuff there. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
did a duet, and then there's more than one country song on that album, but it's fine. And I'm not a huge country fan of music, but I'll listen to anything by Dave just because I think there's, again, I mentioned this before. There's so much personality and so much wonderful charisma in his lyrics and his delivery. I'm just a big fan. Again, I mentioned it. All hail Dave.
all right. All right, sounds good. Well, I appreciate your time and definitely it's been a blast talking David Lee Roth here with you.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Joe. Always a good time. We'll have to see what we come up with next.
Sounds good.